Mr. Balsbaugh, thank you for joining me this afternoon just to have a little conversation. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into K-12 classical education?
Oh gosh. I was in a master's program at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, and I had chosen to do that. I've always wanted to be a teacher, but I had chosen to do that because it looked like the better path to me than getting a teaching credential. So I thought, well, if I have a master's degree in literature, I'll be able to teach in a school around here somewhere.
Sure.
That proved to be more difficult than I thought. So once I had gotten my master's degree, I set about trying to apply to these schools. I couldn't get an interview. I had one interview for a 6th grade job teaching literature where the head of school told me, I invited you in as a favor to a friend, but you're really not going to get a job in the Twin Cities unless you have a teaching credential. So I went home to my wife and said, well, it's all over. We're going home. We're going back to Oregon or California. We've got to figure out something else. And I was in a house sitting for my mentor at the University of St. Thomas. And while I was there, a friend of mine who was getting his teaching credential had been to visit this new little classical school in the Twin Cities, and he brought the material over and laid it out on the carpet, and he said, you have got to try to teach at this school. He had another trajectory, but I was looking at this and thinking, that's what I want to do. That's why I got a degree in literature. I would love that. How in the world am I going to get my foot in the door? And I walked upstairs, and on a plaque on the wall of my mentor's upstairs hallway said, commencement speaker, Trinity School at River Ridge. So it turns out he was on the board of fellows of Trinity School, which had opened a few years earlier in the Twin Cities and was just starting to get some press. So with his connection, I got in, got an interview and did a teaching demonstration. And
they hired you?
And they hired me. They were hiring a lot of folks that year, and I think I snuck in on the tail end.
But you've done okay.
It worked out, yeah.
River Ridge now for a couple of decades, right? How long were you there as a teacher?
I was there for 20 years as a teacher, 8 of those as head of school.
Okay. And most recently, you've been appointed to the presidency of the Trinity Schools. So can you explain River Ridge in relationship to Trinity Schools nationally?
Yeah. So we have 3 schools that are directly operated by our board. The first was founded in South Bend, Indiana in 1981, then River Ridge in 1987 up in Minnesota, and our Falls Church campus in the late 90s. So those are the 3 campuses that our board opened nationally, and they're operated by Trinity Schools as a corporation.
Right.
So those are the 3 schools I oversee, and we also have a member school program with some folks who wanted to use our curriculum, use some of our teacher training.
Sure.
So the Wilberforce School in Princeton, New Jersey, and Trinity Academy in Portland are also something I help out with.
That's fantastic. So there is some growth and sort of by extension some affiliation with Trinity that's happening.
Yeah.
And for those who are viewing, and you know this story, Jon, Great Hearts itself shares some genetic material with Trinity, and we're very thankful for the relationship we have, for example, with Andrew and Jeanette Swarneman, who kind of helped some folks to get started down here in Phoenix, eventually leading to what would become the Great Hearts Academies. So at this particular moment in our nation's history, why do you think, because you're aware of this classical renewal movement, right, in the lower grades and the upper grades, but the K-12 spectrum is seeing this burgeoning classical education coming on the scene. What are the factors that are sort of playing into that renewal from where you sit?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, when we have parents who are maybe checking us out who don't know much about classical or just starting to explore it, there are a couple of things that are concerns on their mind, frankly. One of them is simply the low expectations that their children are encountering in the other schools. So for parents who are looking for higher expectations for their kids, who basically know their kids can do more and aren't being asked to do it, that's a significant source. I think folks really are also looking for some sort of grounding or rootedness in a tradition. They recognize that nationally that's a challenge for us politically, culturally, socially.
Sure.
And so they're looking for something that is rooted, that has some depth to it.
Yep.
And they're looking for a culture of a school that works for them and their family, that really supports the values they're trying to instill at home. And I think a lot of the classical schools have done a lot of hard work, not only on the curriculum, but also on the cultural formation of the school, knowing that you really have to have a community of learners if you're going to do learning in the right way. And that means it's not just nestled between 55-minute class periods.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think one of the things I'm most interested in is to understand and track the growth of this renewal, and encouraged by it, as I'm sure you are. But I'm also interested in what might be the obstacles that we face, right? Because we have families all the time. We have literally thousands of families. I'm sure you have hundreds as well who are coming and asking, tell me more, show me more. Or if they don't have, if you or we or someone doesn't have a school in a neighborhood, how do I get classical to my community? That type of thing. What are the obstacles, as you see it, to promoting and expanding and producing more of these schools nationwide?
I mean, one of them might just relate to everything I said is certainly not everybody. And there is there's a certain niche element to parents who are going to look at this and really love it for what it is. We do have, I think, actually a challenge is that the classical schools have been very successful by conventional educational metrics. And on the one hand, that's a blessing. To have huge SAT scores, great college placement. It's a blessing, and especially when the movement was younger, I think it gave validity to those who might have questioned, what is this all about? Could it ever work? So the fact that we're successful by conventional metrics is great on the one hand. On the other hand, one of the obstacles, I think, not so much to the expansion of the movement, but to retaining its integrity and what it's based in, is a lot of people come to the success of the schools by those conventional metrics, and it's a challenge to articulate the vision of classical education that is far less utilitarian in a straightforward way, and does pertain to the human condition and human awakening and the preservation of great books and great conversations. So if there's an obstacle, I think it's almost an internal obstacle. I've seen in places where charter schools are thriving, I've seen very little obstacle to the expansion of classical schools. It's a brand that works, so to speak.
Yeah, but I think you're right. Maintaining the integrity of the form will be a challenge, because the demand, if it is as great as we think, could produce folks entering the market, so to speak, right? With little or less understanding of how to retain that integrity. So it's the quality, quantity,
quality,
tension,
quantity.
right? Yeah, that's right.
Almost any of it is better than an alternative that just sits with the status quo, though, I will say that.
Yeah. So from where you sit at Trinity, what do you see just over the horizon for classical education, and how do you think Trinity would be making a contribution, right, to the larger movement, if I may call it that?
Yeah, well, I do think, there's a role in this for both private and public charter schools. So that's always going to be, I think, a reality, particularly because of the religious dimension that some parents are looking for explicitly in the schools. So as long as there are parents who are also looking for an explicit religious dimension, I think what's over the horizon is figuring out what that means for Christian classical schools, who also, have their own challenges in figuring out how do we maintain an integrity with the classical and the Christian tradition. The famous "What has Jerusalem to do with Athens?" I think we're still figuring out what Jerusalem has to do with Athens, and that's still going to be ongoing. And I think there are temptations to tip maybe one way or the other of that and not maintain the tension. So I think Trinity, if we have anything to contribute, we do have a long experience in wrestling with that particular question. We've also done some more innovative things with mathematics and sciences that maybe haven't been tried in
Sure.
a traditional classical environment.
Yep.
So yeah, I think we have a lot to offer to those two
I know you do.
conversations in particular.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I know you do. And your very presence here at the symposium is a contribution. Glad to have you here with your team and hope we're going to continue to work together in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jon.